Hey guys, welcome back to Beyond the Box Score, and I am your host Hayat. Today we're breaking down 4 college basketball matchups on March 12th, and this slate is a really interesting one because we've got Texas Tech versus Iowa State, Iowa versus Ohio State, Virginia versus NC State, and Kentucky versus Missouri. And real quick before we dive in, we're on the road to 2K subscribers on this channel. If you enjoy these full slate breakdowns where I go game by game and really talk through the matchups, hitting subscribe genuinely helps the channel grow and keeps these videos coming. Alright, let's get into it and start connecting the dots. First we have Texas Tech versus Iowa State. The lean here is Texas Tech plus the points. Let me walk through why, because when I start thinking about this matchup, the first thing that jumps out to me is the situation around Texas Tech coming into this game. This is a team that finished the year 22-9 overall and 12-6 in conference play, and that conference record matters because they actually owned the tiebreaker with Iowa State. Now situationally, Texas Tech got the double bye into the quarterfinals, so they are the rested side here, while Iowa State just played Arizona State the previous day and they're coming into this one on a back-to-back. And the game is being played on a neutral floor. And yeah, that previous Iowa State game looked dominant on paper, because Iowa State absolutely destroyed Arizona State 91-42, and when you see a score like 91-42 it almost makes you pause and think, okay, are they just rolling right now? But one path I see here is that the context of that game matters, because when I think about this matchup I keep coming back to the first meeting between these teams this season. Texas Tech already won the first meeting. And not only did they win it, they won it at Hilton Coliseum, which is widely considered one of the toughest places to go on the road and win. Hilton Coliseum is described as a top 20 home court environment. And Texas Tech was actually the lone team to beat Iowa State at Hilton Coliseum this season. That's a huge contextual piece for me. Because if a team can go into that building and take one from Iowa State, that tells me the matchup clearly works for them in some way. And when I go back to the flow of that game, it's even more interesting, because Iowa State had a 2-point lead about 5 minutes into the game, so early on it looked competitive, but then you blink and suddenly Texas Tech is up by 20 with less than a minute before halftime. Up by 20 before halftime on the road in Hilton Coliseum. That is a statement stretch of basketball. And the way they got there wasn't some one-player explosion either, it was balance. In that game, 7 players played more than 3 minutes, and 6 of those 7 players scored in double figures. That kind of distribution tells me this wasn't fluky shooting from one guy, it was a system working across the roster. And that matters even more now because of the JT Toppin injury for Texas Tech. Because when you hear JT Toppin injury, the natural thought is okay, does that change the ceiling of this team? And sure, maybe the line looks a little different if he's fully healthy. In fact, there's already the idea floating around that if Texas Tech was healthy with JT Toppin the line might be closer to 1.5. But what connects for me is that when JT Toppin hasn't been there, this group has still shown they can function collectively. That balance we saw with 7 players playing more than 3 minutes and 6 of those 7 players scoring in double figures, that tells me the offense can distribute responsibility. And now we're putting that version of Texas Tech on a neutral floor against an Iowa State team that just played the previous day and is on a back-to-back. And look, I'm not dismissing Iowa State as a team at all. They're projected as a top 3 seed in the NCAAB tournament and possibly even a top 4 seed depending on how things break. That's a serious program with real tournament upside. But if this matchup plays out like the first meeting did, where Texas Tech's depth and balance spreads the scoring out and Iowa State suddenly has to chase multiple threats, the margin tightens quickly. And the way I keep framing this in my head is pretty simple, this feels like a 3-point game. That's the number that keeps popping up when I visualize the different scenarios. If Texas Tech controls tempo early like they did in the first meeting, if they again spread the scoring across multiple players, if Iowa State's back-to-back situation slows them down just a little bit on a neutral floor, then yeah, the door opens for Texas Tech to hang around the entire time. And honestly, one path I see here is Texas Tech not just hanging around but potentially winning outright again. Because they already proved they can beat Iowa State once this season, and they did it in a top 20 home court environment at Hilton Coliseum where they were the lone team to beat Iowa State at Hilton Coliseum this season. That's not a small detail. That's a matchup clue. So when I stack everything together, Texas Tech 22-9 overall, 12-6 in conference play, the double bye into the quarterfinals. Iowa State coming off a 91-42 win over Arizona State but doing it on a back-to-back, the neutral floor setting, the first meeting where Texas Tech won at Hilton Coliseum after Iowa State had a 2-point lead about 5 minutes into the game before Texas Tech exploded to a 20-point lead with less than a minute before halftime. The balance where 7 players played more than 3 minutes and 6 of those 7 players scored in double figures, the JT Toppin injury context, the idea that if Texas Tech was healthy with JT Toppin the line might be closer to 1.5, and the expectation that this could easily settle into a 3-point game, all of that keeps pulling me back to the same place. Yeah, the lean here stays Texas Tech plus the points. Alright, next we have Iowa versus Ohio State. The lean here is Iowa minus 1.5 and under 140.5. Let me walk through why, because this one has a really interesting mix of pace data, previous matchup evidence, and situational clues that kind of point me in the same direction. First off, this game is being played at the United Center in Chicago, Illinois, so we're talking about a neutral environment here. And the current line has Iowa minus 1.5 with a total set at 140.5. Now before even diving into the matchup itself, I keep thinking about Iowa's most recent performance because it tells a story about how this team operates. In the previous game against Maryland, the number was Iowa minus 10.5, and that game eventually closed at minus 11.5. And the way that game played out was a little chaotic because Maryland jumped out to a big lead early and for a while it looked like Iowa might be in trouble. But then Iowa flipped the script late and ended up winning by 11. So the sequence of numbers there matters, Iowa minus 10.5, closing minus 11.5, and the final margin was 11. That tells me Iowa fought their way through adversity and still produced the margin they needed. And now they step into this matchup against an Ohio State team that has been pretty solid this season overall. Ohio State sits at 20-11 straight up and 16-15 ATS. That's a respectable profile, not dominant, but definitely competitive. But what connects for me when I look at this matchup is the previous meeting between these teams earlier in the season. Iowa didn't just win that game, they controlled it. Iowa won by 17 with a final score of 74-57. That's a significant margin, and when you dig into the number that stands out the most is the 57 points for Ohio State. Holding a team to 57 points tells me Iowa's defensive structure in that matchup really disrupted Ohio State's offense. And when I try to imagine this game unfolding tonight, one path I see is a very similar type of flow. Because stylistically, both of these teams operate at a slow tempo. Iowa ranks 359th in the country when it comes to average possession length, and Ohio State ranks 210th in the country in that same category. And when you see a ranking like 359th in average possession length, that means Iowa is basically grinding games down to half-court possessions almost every trip. Ohio State at 210th isn't quite that slow, but it's still firmly on the methodical side. So what you end up with here is a game where both teams are comfortable operating in long possessions, working through half-court sets, and slowing the rhythm of the game. And that's why the total sitting at 140.5 becomes really interesting to me. Because if this matchup plays out the way the pace numbers suggest, with Iowa at 359th in average possession length, and Ohio State at 210th in average possession length, then the number of total possessions in the game starts shrinking. And fewer possessions naturally pull the scoring environment downward. That's why I keep circling back to the under 140.5 here. Because even though both offenses can look good on paper, and both teams are capable of hitting free throws and three-point shots at a decent rate, the style they play in doesn't naturally produce track meet scoring. It produces long half-court stretches, slower shot clocks, and games where each possession carries more weight. And if that style repeats itself tonight, we could easily see another score that lands in a range similar to that previous meeting where Iowa won 74-57 and Ohio State only scored 57 points. Now beyond the pace angle, I also keep thinking about the individual matchup layer. Because Benin Sts is referenced as the best player on the court in this matchup. And when you combine having the best player on the floor with a team that already proved it can beat this opponent by 17 in a 74-57 result, that creates a scenario where Iowa can dictate the terms again. And I keep picturing the different ways this game could develop. Maybe Ohio State keeps it tight early, maybe the pace slows the scoring, maybe the margin stays within a couple possessions for a while. But if the defensive pressure Iowa applied in the first meeting shows up again, Ohio State could struggle to generate consistent offense just like they did when they were held to 57 points. So when I stack everything together, the game at the United Center in Chicago, Illinois, Iowa minus 1.5, the total of 140.5, the previous Iowa game against Maryland where the line was minus 10.5 and closed at minus 11.5 before Iowa won by 11, Ohio State's 20-11 straight up and 16-15 ATS season profile. The previous meeting where Iowa won by 17 with a final score of 74-57 and Ohio State scoring 57 points, the pace metrics with Iowa ranked 359th in the country in average possession length and Ohio State ranked 210th in that same category. And the presence of Benin Sts is the best player on the court, all of those threads keep connecting in the same direction for me. Yeah, the lean here stays Iowa minus 1.5 and under 140.5. Quick pause for a second. If you've got an even one lean you like so far from these Texas Tech versus Iowa State, Iowa versus Ohio State, Virginia versus NC State, or Kentucky versus Missouri breakdowns, hit the like button. It tells me these full slate college basketball videos are worth doing. And if you're new here and you enjoy this thinking out loud style analysis, hit the subscribe button too. We're pushing toward 2K subscribers and every single like and subscribe really helps the channel grow. Alright, let's jump back into the next matchup. Next game we have Virginia versus NC State. The lean here is lay it with the Cavaliers. Let me walk through why, because when I start piecing this matchup together the first thing that jumps out is Virginia sitting at 27-4 on the year and finishing 15-3 in conference play. And that's why they came into the ACC tournament as the 2 seed behind Duke and one of the top 4 teams in the conference. If this matchup plays out like most of Virginia's season has, it becomes a slow grind where defense starts dictating everything, and that's where the contrast with NC State gets interesting. NC State is coming off a 98-88 win over Pitt, but when I replay that game in my head it wasn't as comfortable as the score suggests. Because it was a 1-point game at halftime before things changed later. One path I see here is remembering that NC State actually trailed by as many as 9 points in that game and then flipped momentum later, even leading by as many as 15 points with just under 6 minutes gone in the second half. But when I zoom out, what connects for me is NC State's overall form. They dropped 4 straight and lost 6 of their last 7 to close the year, and that stretch included an OT loss to Notre Dame, a home loss to Stanford, a blowout loss at Duke, and a blowout loss at Virginia. And that last piece matters because Virginia already won both meetings this season, so this matchup has already tilted their way twice. If this matchup plays out like the defensive numbers suggest, Virginia has the tools to choke off what NC State likes to do offensively. Virginia is top 15 in defensive efficiency nationally, top 10 2-point defense, and top 25 3-point defense. And that clashes directly with an NC State offense that ranked top 90 in the country in 3-point shot rate and top 50 in 3-point dependency, basically a team living and dying by the 3 while also living at the foul line. But if Virginia's defense really is back to those callbacks to the Tony Bennett days, the foul line dries up and those perimeter looks get contested. And when I replay that scenario in my head, Virginia controlling pace, forcing NC State away from its 3-point rhythm, and leaning on that top 15 defensive efficiency profile, it keeps pointing me the same direction. Yeah, that's why the lean sticks at lay it with the Cavaliers. Here we go with next game between Kentucky versus Missouri. The lean here is lay 3.5 with Kentucky. Let me walk through why, because this SEC tournament matchup being played in Nashville sets up a really interesting revenge angle and situational contrast. The current number sits with Kentucky minus 3.5 and the total at 150.5, and if this matchup plays out the way I'm picturing it, Kentucky's motivation might matter more than the raw standings. Kentucky is coming off a win against LSU where Kentucky won by 5, and that result kind of lines up with how this team has looked, good enough to win games but not always dominating. And that's important because Kentucky actually finished 9th in the SEC while Missouri finished 8th in the SEC, so these teams were right next to each other in the standings. But what connects for me is the earlier meeting on January 7th, because Missouri went into Rupp Arena and beat Kentucky outright in that game while sitting as 12.5-point underdogs. That's a big swing result, Missouri walking into Rupp Arena as 12.5-point underdogs and leaving with the outright win. So one path I see here is Kentucky approaching this game with that result sitting in the back of their minds. But the venue shift matters too because this game is in Nashville, and Missouri's profile away from home has been shaky. Missouri has been stronger at home but has struggled on the road, struggled away from Missouri, and struggled on neutral sites. If this matchup plays out like those road patterns suggest, Missouri's offensive rhythm could wobble once they're not in their comfort environment. Now I will say the hesitation I keep circling is Kentucky themselves, because they finished 9th in the SEC and there's been this feeling all season that Kentucky can look a bit fraudulent when laying over a bucket. But if the revenge angle from January 7th kicks in, if Missouri's road struggles show up again on a neutral site in Nashville, and if Kentucky carries momentum from that win where Kentucky won by 5 against LSU, the path opens for them to control this game. Yeah, that's why the lean sticks at lay 3.5 with Kentucky. Alright, that wraps it up for all 4 matchups on March 12th. Texas Tech vs Iowa State, Iowa vs Ohio State, Virginia vs NC State, and Kentucky vs Missouri. As always, this was analysis and opinion only, nothing guaranteed, just me working through how these games could play out if the situations line up the way they look on paper. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe because we're pushing toward the goal of reaching 2K subscribers on Beyond the Box Score and every bit of support really helps. I'm curious how you're seeing these spots, so drop a Z in the comments and let me know which game stood out to you the most or if you're seeing something differently in any of these matchups. More breakdowns like this coming soon, same raw format, same deep dives, same Beyond the Box Score analysis.